Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, how are you getting on? Welcome to a brand new Starfield video, and today Bethesda have just released our first little look at and official introduction to the first companion that we will be meeting on our journey through Starfield, and that is the robot Vasco. Okay, yeah, so Vasco is our first companion. We kind of have met him a tiny little bit before, but this is our first little official introduction to the character and his background and origins and stuff, which is really, really cool. So this comes via Bethesda's usual little 1-minute snippet videos that they've been putting out on and off for a while. So far, this has only come out through the Constellation mailing list, so if you head over to Bethesda.net, you can find the option to join Constellation, and they will send you emails out a little bit early with all this information and stuff in it, so if you want to do that, then do check that one out. The video will doubtless be arriving on their YouTube channels for everybody, probably tomorrow, I guess, but certainly before too long. But yeah, we're getting a first little look at the new character, and this has been introduced by Istvan Paley, I believe the surname was, who is the lead artist on Starfield. Really, really cool. And yeah, we get a little bit of information about this character. I'm really, really happy to be correct on the name as well, because I drew the conclusion that that was his name based on what we see written on the mirror in the trailer from last summer. And the only likely character that that message is referring to would be the robot in the trailer, since it was probably written by the player character. And that name reference is Vasco, so yeah. Not a great logical leap there, but cool to have that confirmed, as I realised recently that was mostly speculation. But yeah, really, really happy about this. Really cool to see we got a robot. So, back in the day, I can't remember exactly which video it was or interview, but Bethesda did mention that they've got certain team members who are into all manner of different things that tie into what is becoming the world of Starfield. One of those things I mentioned was team members with an interest in robotics. So obviously this is like a personal interest outside of their regular work that is now coming into it, because it's informing some of their decision making on design for things like robots like Vasco. So really cool to see stuff like that coming in. So we pretty much knew even way back when that there were likely to be a big role for robots in Starfield, and obviously we've seen Vasco in the trailers before. So really cool to get an introduction. Obviously in the last video Bethesda put out, which was the Into the Starfield for the Explorers video they did that I covered a few weeks ago. I'll link that if you'd like to check it out. They did actually give us a very, very short, probably gameplay clip, sort of meeting Vasco. So it looks very, very likely we'll be meeting him when we get our ship for the first time. There's a couple of things that imply that. It looks like that clip that we saw previously and gets replayed in this video also shows us that initial meeting, and it looks to take place on our ship. You add to the fact that we're going to find out that Vasco has Constellation colours, a Constellation paint job, basically, on his chassis, albeit a worn-out one, then you can kind of confirm that from that, and obviously the fact it matches the paint job on your spaceship, that the two are probably going to go together. And also when we look at some of the concept art that again pops up in this video, you see Vasco working on the ship in some of that early concept art, like doing some repairs or something. So the idea that you meet him on the ship and he has a strong relationship to your ship, which obviously is going to be a very central part of the story anyway. So we're space explorers. Constellation are the last group of space explorers, and we're the newest member of. So that whole thing being tied together is somewhat confirmed here. A little bit of speculation on the back of that, but seems very, very likely. It's really, really cool. Yes, he's described as a Constellation Expeditionary Robot, and a lot of his design and functionality goes around that. So he's a bipedal robot that's able to cover rough terrain on foot, which is cool. We can see from some of the concept art in the video that he's got a few little bits of design that are geared towards him assisting the player, or the Constellation Explorer, in this case the player, in their exploration, in their travelling around new planets, things like that. He can carry loads of gear for you, and he's got little attachments and things like that that are useful for an explorer, like we see a winch on the concept art as well. So whether or not that winch actually made it into the final version of Vasco, I'm not too sure. I haven't spotted one on the model anywhere yet. And even if it did, chances are it would be a flavour thing rather than a functional thing. You can see why a robot's companion for an explorer going out traversing new planets and stuff might find a use for a winch. Same way that you might find it on an off-road vehicle. But actually working that into the game, it would be very, very cool to see that winch being used for some actual functionality. But whether or not it will is an open question. I'm leaning towards probably not, just because we think that very likely there will be other companions as well. It seems to be the case. It's certainly been heavily implied. So if you happen to be out with a different companion and you don't have Vasco there, and yet you absolutely have to have the winch for something, you might be potentially knackered. So I'm guessing it'll be a flavour thing rather than anything else. But it's a cool little design thing as an expeditionary explorer type robot, which is really, really cool. So a couple of other cool things I mentioned in that video is that he is a utilitarian heavy-duty piece of machinery, and he's capable of carrying a certain amount of gear for your explorations. So it does seem heavily implied from that, not out and out stated, but heavily implied, that you'll be able to offload some of the stuff you're carrying into your companion's inventory, which is fairly standard fare for Bethesda games. You can do it in just about all of them, really, so not massively surprised to see that particular feature coming back. Also implies things like the character that you play will probably have an encumbrance limit, so there'll be a limit to how much stuff you can carry around. I know that's not everybody's favourite thing, but it's something present in every Bethesda game pretty much that I can remember, so we're going back at least to Oblivion, so seems very likely that it would make a reappearance in Starfield as well, so being able to offload some of your stuff onto your companion is quite cool. I'm guessing a robot like Vasco would have a decent amount of cargo space himself and carrying capacity. He looks reasonably solid, durable and strong. Certainly mentioned his heavy machinery type build, so that's really cool. So the video is about 1 minute and 15 long, and we get a little snippet of information on Vasco's background here as well, which is very basic but cool nonetheless, which is a first look at one of the in-universe brands that are out there, one of the companies that worked out there, other than the ones that we've heard already that form major factions. You know, we've heard about some companies that are going to have a big role, but this one is a new one, and they're called Lunar Robotics. So sounds likely that they will be based on Earth's moon. Lunar could technically mean any moon, but it usually is used to refer to Earth's moon. So it's probably a moon-based robotics company. And it sounds like he wasn't originally designed for Constellation, but was in fact sort of refurbished and retrofit a little bit for use by Constellation explorers like the player, which is really cool. So Vasco, it would seem, has been around a bit and has travelled around space a bit as well. You can see in the trailers, in some of the concept art, not so much there, but some of it, that his chassis is all beaten up. There's dents and scratches and the paintwork's chipped and stuff like that. And that's directly referenced in this video as being the fact that he's had a certain amount of use and wear and tear over the years. So it looks like we're not the first Constellation Explorer that will be accompanied by Vasco. It seems like he'll have been around for a while. So in the last video that Bethesda put out, and that I covered, they talked about how companions were going to be sort of emphasizing things going on in the world and offering observations and thoughts about what's going on around you, which is fairly standard fare for a Bethesda companion. It sounds like they're leaning even more into that and trying to bring these things to life. I know in the past, Todd Howard has mentioned how he wanted to try and make NPC interactions, which will especially include companions, obviously, that much more realistic and lifelike, so it'll probably apply here. Obviously, Vasco's a robot, so just how lifelike without it, and still have it feel like a robot is, you know, there's a bit of artistic license there, I suppose. But that's potentially cool, but if Vasco's got a lot of background experience working with Constellation and previous explorers, then there's probably going to be history and past experiences he might reference during random encounters, things that he might comment on. Hopefully stuff about Constellation in general. Like I say, the adventures that he's experienced with other explorers prior to the player character might be very, very interesting. He might have, especially if he's been around for a long time, he might have a lot of history to draw on and sort of awareness of what's gone on in the universe in the past. Should be very, very interesting to have little references like that. So a lot of potential interest there. Apparently the team at Bethesda are big fans of this particular character. I'm not massively surprised. They seem to like their robot characters. Codsworth springs to mind from Fallout 4. For a robot, he does seem to have plenty of character, and Bethesda have got that big thing where they lean into robots and give them a certain amount of life and personality and stuff like that. If you've ever seen footage of the sort of foyer lobby area of Bethesda's main office in Maryland, they've actually got a life-size statue of Codsworth in there. They've also got a few other life-size statues of significant figures around, but Codsworth's one of the big ones, and he's up there on a big stand in the the entrance to the office, which is really, really cool. I'd love to see that personally, but very, very cool nonetheless. So Bethesda and their robots is definitely a thing, and this is going to be very interesting. Obviously, the NASA punk vibe of the whole thing with Starfield, and the interest of certain developers in robotics sort of tie it back to that real-world robotics design. So a lot of this design work that you can see on the actual chassis, the final product of Vasco, is very much founded in robotics that's going on in the world now. And if you've ever seen clips that pop up in the news or on the internet from time to time of real-world robotics, then this is definitely going to look familiar, which is really, really cool. So, yeah, I think that mostly covers everything we've got out of this video. Obviously, the video is only 1:15 long, so it's not a vastly in-depth thing, but it's nice to get an official introduction to Vasco, which is really cool. My hunch, as I say, is that we'll meet him when we get our starship, because of all the links in there and the little snippets from the trailers and stuff that they've put out so far and clips of gameplay. I suspect this clip of gameplay that we're seeing here, it's the same one that was in the previous video, as I said, is when we just meet Vasco. My suspicion here is that it's not gameplay per se, more like a very carefully staged thing for the trailers, but filmed in-game. You see in that shot that the way the camera moves just doesn't make me think it's the sort of way you will actually see it in-game, because this is going to be a first-person... Well, it'll be first and third, that's the way Bethesda do things. But it's got this kind of cinematic movements to the camera in that little bit of footage, and it kind of crops into a closer shot on Vasco, which, if you're seeing it from the player's perspective, particularly in first person, but also in third, it seems less likely that it will switch out to a cutscene. It's possible that that introduction will be in cutscene form, or that kind of style, which would explain the camera moves, but I feel like it's more likely you walk in, the robot will get up, look at you and say hello, rather than actually switching over to a cutscene. So my guess there is it's kind of deliberately made more cinematic, but is in-game footage in that regard. So not gameplay, but in-game footage, if that makes sense. But yeah, really, really cool to have all of this. As I say, pulling a lot out of a very short video here, so I'll round this one off now as we've covered just about everything I've noticed. I'm sure there'll be other people out there talking about this as well, and possibly even spotting things that I missed. But yeah, very cool. Really happy to get an introduction to Vasco, and I'm very, very excited to meet him, and also to find out more about other companions, which doubtless we will be doing in the coming months. I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter in the last few days about people commenting how we're probably about 2 months out from gameplay at the moment, and the wait is almost over. Yes and yes, we are about 2 months out from gameplay. It's probably going to be the second half of June when we actually get our gameplay bit, which is standard for Bethesda. They normally put that sort of thing out in the summer for a Christmas window Q4 release. So this is normal behaviour as to the fact that we haven't seen gameplay yet. There's nothing to be concerned about if you were there. That's just the way they release these details. Very, very good from the point of view of not disappointing people, because, you know, if they have to pull a feature, for whatever reason, things don't always work out. If we haven't seen it, we can't be upset when it doesn't arrive. And that's just the way things go. Anyway, before I go off on a whole rant about that, yeah, that's much to be expected that we're going to see it this summer, and I'm not sure I'd say the wait is over yet, given that it's still 2 months out, but I enjoy the optimism nonetheless, and I'm very much looking forward to that myself. So, if you enjoyed this video, you found it interesting and informative, and if you're excited to see more Starfield content, which of course I will be covering, you know where the subscribe button is and the notification bell. Please do consider dropping likes as well. I very, very much appreciate it. Down below the video, you'll find social media links, merch store, and channel memberships as well if you're interested in supporting the channel that way. And we live stream regularly playing Fallout 76, a few other bits and pieces besides, and of course when the time comes, Starfield as well. So I'd love to have you join us there. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.